All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're driving straight into the life, the absolute reign, and the ultimate downfall of one of the most complex heavyweights of the ancient world. We're talking about the Mesopotamian god, Enlil. For centuries, this figure sat at the very pinnacle of ancient pantheons, literally shaping how early human civilizations understood the forces of nature, divine power, and even their own existence. Really, if you want to understand the foundational mindset of ancient Mesopotamia, you've absolutely got to understand Enlil.
So, quick question for you. Have you ever been so incredibly annoyed by your noisy neighbors that you just decided to flood the entire world? Okay, it sounds like an absurd punchline, right? But if we look at the Akkadian version of the flood story recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh, this is quite literally the catalyst for the near extinction of the human race. The human population had just grown way too large, and frankly, they were making a total racket.
And for Enlil, the supreme deity we're decoding today, the answer to that noisy neighbor problem was a resounding, terrifying yes. He was just trying to get some sleep, the humans were too loud, and so he decided to annihilate every living thing on Earth with a massive deluge. Right out of the gate, this tells us everything we need to know about the core of Enlil's character. The guy possesses unimaginable, world-ending power, yet he's driven by this surprisingly relatable, almost petty, extreme temper. Part 1, Lord of the Wind. The very name Enlil comes directly from ancient Sumerian. En translates to Lord, and Lil, well, that's a heavily debated term. Scholars argue over whether it means wind in the sense of a physical weather phenomenon, which would make him a lord of the storm, or if it's more about a spirit or phantom whose presence is only felt as a stirring of the air. Some experts, like Piotr Steinkeller, even suggest Enlil might have been this grand universal god without one single specific domain. But looking at the structure of his name, it isn't just saying he's the Lord of the Wind like it's his job title. It actually suggests he was the literal personification of Lil. He didn't just control this invisible, terrifying force. He was the force itself. Now, what's super interesting here is the number 50. The Sumerians had this incredibly deep, complex numerological system, where certain numbers held profound ritual weight. Within that system, 50 was Enlil's sacred number. And it wasn't just a fun label, it was a way of anchoring his vast abstract mythology into concrete data. Alongside the gods En and Enki, Enlil formed a divine triad that embodied the stars in the night sky. Enlil himself specifically governed the northern sky. Which brings us to his immense, almost incomprehensible cosmic authority. According to Sumerian creation myths, way back at the beginning, there was only Namu, the primeval sea. She gave birth to An, the sky, and Ki, the earth. Enlil was then born to An and Ki, and he literally ripped the universe apart. He separated heaven from earth by brute force, taking the earth off as his own personal domain. And by doing that, he essentially made the world habitable for humanity. There's actually a Sumerian hymn that describes him as being so gloriously, radiantly holy that not even the other gods were allowed to look directly at him. Basically, to the ancient Mesopotamians, without Enlil, civilization literally could not exist.
Part 2, Center of the Worlds.
So, where do you worship a god like that? You build the Akkar Temple. Located right in the heart of the Sumerian city-state of Nippur, the name literally translates to mountain house. And the myth goes that Enlil built and established this temple himself. The Mesopotamians didn't just see this as a building, they viewed the Akkar as the mooring rope of heaven and earth. Think of it like a massive physical tether tying the two realms together, a direct, open channel of communication bridging mortal humans and the divine sphere. And here's the fact that brilliantly illustrates just how supreme he was. Nippur was utterly unique because it was the only Sumerian city-state that never built a palace for a mortal king. Why? Because Enlil himself was considered the city's true reigning king. So instead of being a political capital, it was the absolute ultimate religious center. Human rulers from all over Sumer, and later even the Babylonian kings, would make the pilgrimage to Enlil's temple in Nippur for one specific reason: to seek his recognition and have their earthly right to rule officially legitimized by the supreme god himself. Part 3, Creator and Destroyer. You really see his extreme dualities here. They stand in such stark contrast to one another. On the one hand, Enlil was envisioned as this benevolent, caring father figure who lovingly watches over humanity. He's credited as the inventor of crucial agricultural tools and the patron of farming itself. But then, on the flip side, he is the raging storm. He's a fiercely intolerant, strict judge who, as we mentioned right at the start,
was totally fine with wiping out all of humanity with a massive flood simply because they were overpopulated and too loud. To really grasp his positive, creator side, listen to this quote from an ancient poem about Enlil inventing the pickaxe or the mattock. He basically conjures this magnificent, incredibly beautiful tool into existence. The myth says it was made of pure gold with a head carved straight from lapis lazuli, and he decrees its fate. He gifts it to humanity so they can build cities, pull up weeds, and establish sustainable agriculture. In their eyes, he was the literal divine engine making plant growth and civilized life possible. But then, boom, we're right back to his terrifying wrath. When you track the Great Flood myth across the different ancient traditions, this fascinating, wild pattern emerges. In the older Sumerian version, the hero Yasudra survives thanks to the god Enki, and Enlil ends up granting him immortality. But jump to the later Akkadian version featuring Utnapishtim, and Enlil is explicitly the one who causes the flood. When he finds out Utnapishtim actually survived with the help of the god Ea, Enlil is absolutely incredibly outraged. It actually takes his own son, Ninurta, stepping in and calmly arguing that humans should probably just be managed with famines and wild animal attacks instead of total global annihilation, just to talk him off the ledge. Appeased, Enlil finally enters the boat and rewards the survivors with immortality. It is just a staggering emotional swing from apocalyptic rage to divine blessing.
Part 4. Stolen Destinies and War. The mythology surrounding Enlil is full of wild chaos. Take the myth of Enlil and Ninlil. It's historically super significant because it's actually the oldest known myth in history where a god changes shape. Basically, Enlil seduces the goddess Ninlil, conceiving the moon god Nana. But because of this major transgression, Enlil is banished down to Kur, the underworld. Ninlil actually follows him down there, but Enlil decides to use shape-shifting to sequentially seduce her again in disguise. First, he impersonates the gatekeeper of the underworld, fathering Nergal, the god of death. Then, he shapeshifts into the man of the river, fathering Nin-Azu. Finally, he becomes the man of the boat, fathering Enbalulu, the inspector of canals. It is this complex, totally bizarre, mythological coming-of-age story that essentially builds out the entire family tree of the underworld gods. And then we have the literal heist story of the stolen Tablet of Destinies. This tablet was a deeply sacred clay tablet that literally encoded and granted Enlil his supreme authority over the universe. Well, this giant, monstrous bird named Anzu decides to betray Enlil and steals the tablet. And the timing? He swipes it right when Enlil has taken off his divine crown to prepare for a bath. Instantly, the rivers dry up, and all the gods are entirely stripped of their powers. It's kind of hilarious, but also profound. It highlights how incredibly fragile even supreme absolute divine authority can be when you just step away to wash up. Ultimately, after all the other gods fail, it's Enlil's warrior son Ninurta who defeats the Anzu bird and returns the tablet, saving the entire cosmos. Part 5. The Fall to Marduk. Now, looking at the actual historical timeline of his worship, Enlil's prominence really takes off starting in the 24th century BC. That's when the importance of the original sky god An began to wane. Enlil holds dominant power all the way through the Amorite period and even enjoys a brief resurgence during the Kissite period around 1592 BC. But then we hit 1230 BC. The Elamites attack and utterly sack his holy city of Nippur. And because his power was so physically tied to that temple, the physical destruction of his city led to the ultimate, permanent decline of his cult. What is truly fascinating, though, is how this real-world physical defeat was rationalized and written directly into the mythology. We have this badly damaged Neo-Assyrian text that describes a literal, devastating war of the gods. The Babylonian national god Marduk leads his army straight into the sacred city of Nippur, causing a massive flood and total conflict. Marduk defeats the resident gods, who are known as the Eshumesha gods, and he takes 360 of them as literal prisoners of war. And guess who is among those physical prisoners? Enlil himself. The supreme creator, the Lord of the Wind, is put on trial. This myth signals a massive foundational cultural shift in ancient history, officially cementing Marduk's place as the new supreme god and closing the book on Enlil's era forever. The ancient text recording Enlil's downfall actually ends with a truly desperate warning from the goddess Damkiana. She openly begs both the gods and humanity to never, ever repeat this devastating war. It's a powerful moment that leaves us looking back at Enlil, this god who ripped apart heaven and earth, who built magnificent cities and then destroyed them with floods, only to wind up a defeated prisoner of a brand new age. And it forces us to ask, If the absolute, unshakable, supreme power of the ancient world can be imprisoned and entirely replaced, what does that tell us about the fragile, cyclical nature of our very own structures of power today?